Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israel responds to Hamas-provoked terror attacks with targeted airstrikes in Gaza. The contentious Jerusalem flag parade finally hits the streets after twice being delayed. And finally, thousands of Americans in Israel reportedly trapped due to backlogs at the embassies. Stay tuned for the details and more on the efforts to address the growing crisis. We begin tonight with unfortunate news from around the Palestinian town of Hizmid, just northeast of Jerusalem. An attempted Palestinian car ramming turned stabbing attack Wednesday morning, targeting Israeli soldiers stationed nearby. The IDF responding to the suspected terror attack with live fire, mortally wounding the assailant. Palestinian media reporting the suspect as being a 29-year-old woman from the town of Abu Dis. Meanwhile, the attack coming on the heels of a sharp increase in conflict over the past few days in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. Israeli police having to shoot another Palestinian woman dead on Saturday after she ran at crossing guards with a knife, ignoring repeated calls to stop. Similarly, on Friday, a Palestinian teen killed in clashes with the IDF. Meantime, conflict between Israel and Hamas kicking up again. Israel responding to the terror group's arson attacks and violent incitements with airstrikes in the early morning on Wednesday. Israeli forces striking a number of Hamas terror group targets in Gaza Wednesday morning. No injuries or deaths reported, but Palestinian media outlets confirming the sites as belonging to Hamas's military wing. And this in retaliation to the over 24 fires spreading across southern Israeli towns caused by incendiary devices launched from the Strip. The back and forth being the first such violence since the 11 days of conflict in May, and also the first under the new Bennett-Lapid government. The IDF and Prime Minister Bennett, however, vowing to continue responding forcefully to any breaches of Israeli sovereignty, including treating arson attacks the same as a rocket attack. As for Hamas, the Palestinian terror group still claiming victory on all fronts. Under Hamas's incitements, Palestinians seen rioting along the Gaza border, one of whom was reportedly shot in the leg. And this in addition to the continuing incendiary and explosive balloons that float over the border towards Israeli civilian communities. Additionally, the Jerusalem flag parade scheduled for Tuesday eventually changing its route to avoid the Muslim quarter in the Old City of Jerusalem. A shift Hamas is taking credit for, claiming to have established, quote, a new formula of deterrence with respect to dealing with Israel. Recent polls, meanwhile, seemingly supporting Hamas's assertions, at least as far as the Palestinians are concerned. The Palestinian Center for Policy Survey Research releasing its study on Tuesday, and the report finding that at least 53% of respondents believe that the Islamist terror group Hamas is, quote, most deserving of representing and leading the Palestinian people. This as opposed to less than 15% who prefer the Fatah party under Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Joining me now to further discuss the recent resumption of escalations between Israel and Hamas, former commander of the Israeli Tel Aviv Air Base, Brigadier General in the Reserves, Relik Shafir. Brigadier General, thank you so much. Now, saying that they'll treat arson the same as rockets and hitting Hamas targets overnight, would you agree that Prime Minister Bennett and Defense Minister Gantz are arguably taking a harsher stance on Hamas than the Netanyahu administration?
Not really, because this is a testing period of relationship between Hamas and the Gaza Strip and the new Israeli administration. So they tried out for a less than missiles attack by the balloons. And I think the Air Force strikes were weaker than anything that could really take an effect of balance. So it's a kind of a game. Yes, the Hamas is going to stay on. They're going to present their objectives of being the leaders, so to speak, of the Muslim world, fighting for Al-Aqsa, etc. And Israel will continue its strikes, of which those done today didn't cause much harm.
Well, so that's exactly it. There's a common complaint that the IDF sends a hollow message meant only for keeping up appearances by targeting empty buildings, and certainly this seems to still be true. So do you think that this might change? Might Gantz and Bennett go further in the near future?
Well, it really depends on what Hamas will do. It's a game of taking credit. So Hamas has gotten its credit of being proactive with the show of flags yesterday. The Air Force did its part, or the IDF did its part by bombing, yes, some hollow targets. And the days ahead will determine whether the status quo that took place since the May conflict will stay on or not. So both sides were kind of keeping up their words of what they're going to do. I'm not sure it's indicative of what's going to happen in the near future.
All right, so let's move on for a moment to Hamas's supposed new formula of deterrence against Israel. Have you noticed any markedly different tactics creeping up along the border with Israel or coming from Hamas in recent weeks? Or do you think maybe that Hamas is just puffing its chest in a bluff, or maybe they do have a plan and it's not yet in action?
Well, it's more of the same in the sense that it succeeded in boosting their morale and their stance within the Palestinian community, the outcome of the May conflict. So they want to keep that feeling out. And Israel should think of whether, or we should think of whether we should carry on with supposedly inciting the area, as it seems. And it's also a test for the new Bennett administration. So I think the days ahead, whether the money will flow from Qatar to Gaza, how much the Egyptians are going to intervene, these will actually decide the outcome. Otherwise, it'll be more of the same as we've seen in the last few years.
All right, now my final question. Hamas is claiming to be a winner, and the polls are showing Palestinian support increasing for the terror group. But abroad, the Arab world may be not so convinced. Egyptian-American political analyst Majdi Khalil saying just last week that Hamas doesn't care about any civilians, Israeli or Palestinian. That Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar admitted to keeping military bases in residential high-rises and is unlikely to move them. And he accused Palestinian leadership of exploiting the cause for their own gains in power and on behalf of Iran. So is Hamas actually gaining or losing momentum in the Arab world, in your opinion?
I think they are gaining in momentum in the sense that the Palestinian problem, so to speak, is staying on air, needing to be taken care of. They're not being forgotten as the losers on the side. And both the Arab world, the Egyptians and the Israelis have to relate to Hamas. They're not going away. So they have put their mark in the area. They've been able to create a new interest or a new nuisance. They're not going away, and their problems will have to be taken care of one way or another. So I think as far as they're concerned, even though they paid a high price, they did get a foot and a foothold in the conflict in a much more active way than they did before.
All right. Brigadier General Reserves Galik Shafir, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you.
In other news, tons of controversy surrounding the annual Jerusalem Flag March. So in the end, what actually occurred there? Well, for the most part, thousands of Israelis simply arriving to show solidarity with the stated message of the march, the celebration in the unifying of Jerusalem in 1967 following the illegal Jordanian occupation over half of the city for the previous 20 years. Most parade participants just waving flags and singing and seemingly feeling indifferent to the shifting of the route away from the Muslim quarter of the city, a move intended to reduce tensions and the likelihood of confrontation. That said, under threat of violence from Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, a political tone certainly was present throughout the crowd. Both parade participants and march organizers, including extreme right MKs, turned the march into a statement against terror and against the new government.
Back in our country, that's first, as a son of the Holocaust survivor, it's not only a holy mission, it's survivors. Now, if they say that the flag is provocation, that means that being Jews in Israel for them is provocation.
אנחנו באנו לכאן כדי לומר לחמאס מדינת ישראל היא בעלת הבית על ירושלים. אנחנו לא ניכנע לתכתיבים שלכם, לא לאיומים שלכם. מאוד מצער שחבר בממשלת ישראל מנסור עבאס מדבר על התגרות, על צעדה בירושלים עם דגל זה התגרות. זה הפרצוף של הממשלה הזאת. כך נראית הממשלה הזאת.
Meanwhile, crossing the line of protests, small pockets of protesters recorded chanting "Death to Arabs," among other slogans, prompting swift condemnations from the government. Foreign Minister and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid, for one, tweeting that the chants are a disgrace to Israel and that such racism and hate on behalf of the Israeli flag is abominable and unforgivable. Finally, many Palestinians likewise crossing the line between protest and assault. Under both Hamas's and the Palestinian Authority's incitement, violent clashes erupting against police in several locations along the route of the parade. And at least 27 people were reportedly injured, 3 of whom were evacuated to hospital. Additionally, 17 were arrested for throwing rocks and assaulting both civilians and officers. Speaking of change, from longest-serving Israeli Prime Minister to opposition leader to squatter, a new group letter to the Prime Minister's office calling on Benjamin Netanyahu to vacate the official premier's residence in Jerusalem by June 27 or face a petition for eviction. And the letter filed in outrage over Netanyahu's continued use of the Balfour Street residence to host former United States Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley and Christians United for Israel founder John Hagee on Monday. Chana Rifkin joining us with the details. So, Chana, what's the big deal? Because after all, this was really just a day after the confirmation of the new government. It sounds reasonable for Netanyahu to continue hosting or doing whatever it is that he's doing at the residence.
I mean, it's reasonable for him to still be there. After all, how fast can you move out? But it seems like he was hosting Nikki Haley and
the Kufi founder.
Yeah, in an official kind of way, as if he was still prime minister, which is why it was raising eyebrows. Now, Netanyahu has been known throughout his 12-year tenure to use the Balfour residence to make a statement. If you were invited there, it was an honor, and if you weren't, it was a snub.
So it sounds like people are maybe just upset that he appears to have not moved on from his position or something?
Yeah.
All right, well, so this situation seems awkward, but what's happening now? Are there actions being taken to push forward the transfer of power, the transfer of the residence, including Netanyahu's removal from the space?
Right, so it's kind of awkward, right, because there's no official protocol, there's no director general running the show, so it's kind of hard to make a push. It has to be done maybe through petition, which brings me to this point here, where the Prime Minister group who has been holding anti-Netanyahu protests over the past year. And
they're the ones who filed this.
They sent a letter to the Prime Minister's office threatening to petition the high courts if they don't come up with a date, an official date within the next 2 weeks that Netanyahu has to be out of the residence. And a legal advisor in the Prime Minister's office has already advised to stop paying for utilities both in the Balfour residence and also his personal residence in Caesarea.
Oh, all right. Well, it's going to be a very interesting 2 weeks to see what happens and whether or not Prime Minister Netanyahu moves, I guess. Chana Rifkin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, now this next issue is begging attention, but for the most part, it's going under the radar. American citizens living in Israel saying they've been trapped, abandoned, and even held hostage by the suspension of American citizen services at United States embassies. In fact, it's currently virtually impossible to get an appointment in Israel before August of 2022, meaning that even renewing a passport or filing for a new one for minors can be effectively impossible. And the massive backlog only getting worse following the cancellation of services first due to COVID and then again in May due to the conflict with Hamas in Gaza. The silver lining is that Yad Le'olim, or the Hand for Immigrants organization, is working to address this growing problem. Rabbi Dov Lipman, founder and director of government relations for Yad Le'olim and former Yesh Atid Knesset member, joins me with answers. Rabbi, thanks so much for being with us again. Now, could you put this into perspective for us, please? How bad is the backlog, and in what ways specifically are Americans in Israel being affected? What services are unavailable?
So the backlog is in the tens of thousands. American immigrants to Israel, we call them olim, who maintain their American citizenship. And in order to travel, they certainly need their American passport, because on their Israeli passport, they would need a visa to travel to Israel, which they don't have. And passports have expired, children have been born, and the services have pretty much ceased, and it's almost impossible to get an appointment. There was a law change or a policy change to allow people who had their passports expire during the past year, during Corona, to travel to the United States with the expired passport. But two things. First of all, while they're in America, they would be required to get a new one, which is almost impossible to do. Or some of them even submitted their expired passports and never got anything back, and now they have nothing in their hands. So you're talking about people who literally during the summer would normally just travel. It's part of living in Israel as an Oleh, as an immigrant from the United States. You travel, you go visit your family. And now, Aaron, people are trapped on both sides because we've been dealing this whole year with trying to get the American families to come to Israel and navigate people through all of that. And now the other option, which people wanted to have, which was just to go to America, is also being closed before them. That's a big impetus for why we started Yad Le'olim.
All right, well, so I also understand that this has actually erupted into even a black market for appointments?
So I don't even know exactly how this works. I have been told about certain people who are able to help with appointments, and I don't know what they exactly did. They got appointments, sort of bought a bunch en masse, ordered a bunch en masse, and then they're selling them. I don't know how that all works. I know that we're trying to work through the regular authorities and try to find solutions. It has not been simple at all. And that's why I mentioned to you, one of the things that we're trying to do is that people who move to Israel shouldn't have these frustrations of bureaucracy, both on the Israeli side and dealing with the American side. And therefore, Yad Le'olim has been established to be an organization to help people through those processes, and also, very importantly, to be able to lobby both the Israeli government and, when necessary, to work with the American government to deal with issues that come up.
Yeah, could you please maybe expand a little bit on what specifically Yad Le'olim is doing to get the ball rolling, and especially now President Biden finally appointing or nominating Thomas Nides as the U.S. envoy to Israel, the official envoy finally. Do you think that might change anything on the ground?
It will help because having an embassy staff to deal with will make a big difference. In the past, when we had issues that came up, we had an ambassador, his staff, people who we were able to make contact with to deal with any issues that came up. So we've been waiting for a new embassy staff to come in, and then obviously we'll go and meet with them and try to make sure that these issues don't happen in the future. And by the way, I'll just mention, we're in the middle of a campaign right now, just to make sure we have those services available. It's yadleolim.org/donation. For anyone who is either someone who moved to Israel or family overseas who wants to see an organization that's available to smooth out all the bureaucratic issues and all the government-related issues, that's what we're trying to provide for both the immigrants and their families.
All right, Yad Le'olim, Rabbi Dov Lipman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
Moving on now, Israelis celebrating their newfound freedom from coronavirus restrictions, including the lifting of the mask-wearing mandate. But are we again celebrating too soon? An outbreak of the virus reported at a school in Modi'in with 11 children confirmed infected and some 90 other students placed in quarantine. Joining me to discuss is Professor Yehuda Adler, internal cardiology medical director and specialist and coronavirus advisor to several local authorities. Professor Adler, thank you so much for being with us. Now, did we make a mistake by removing the mask mandate?
No, we made a mistake when we canceled the Green Pass 3 weeks ago or 1 month ago. And I think we spoke then, and I told you it's a mistake, it's too early. You can't do it so early when all over the world there is a coronavirus. And what happened in the school with the father who came from abroad and contaminated his son, and his son went to the school and contaminated all the others, prove that I'm right. The big problem we have today is, one, the airport of Ben Gurion. Second, the nearly 1 million people, adult people, who are not immunized. 3, the children who are not immunized. And 4, we have to remember that even if I got the vaccination twice, it's not necessary I'm immunized, because it's only 95% success. 5%, 1 for 20, are not succeeding to be immunized by the vaccine. So we have to remember all those details and to be careful, especially in Ben Gurion Airport.
So is this an outbreak that we should be worried about, though? Can it get any worse, or should most of our concerns be surrounding people traveling in and out of the country?
I don't think we have to be worried about it, and I think the Minister of Health and the office worked very well in this case, but we have to improve our abilities and technologies in Ben Gurion. I don't know what is going with the bracelet today, but we are not doing it. We are not doing the following of the icon of the telephone, the smart phone. We are not following the people who are coming enough to be in isolation, where they need to be in isolation in Israel. So we have a lot of problems we have to improve in Ben Gurion Airport. And Ben Gurion is the main problem here. The second problem is the cancellation, as I said, of the Green Pass, because let's say you are going to a theater, and in the theater you have 300 people. And let's say 30 of them are not immunized, and one of them are with coronavirus, and it can contaminate a lot of people. So it was a mistake. It was a political decision, as I said before, and not a medical decision, and I'm sorry for it. So in this situation, we don't have to worry, but we have to be very, very careful. I want to show you what is going in Britain. In Britain, there is another spike of coronavirus. This is the variant from Hodu. And we know that the Pfizer vaccine is working against it. But in England, they didn't get the Pfizer. They got another, I don't remember what they called it exactly, but it's not so efficiency against this virus from Hodu, the variant. So our situation is very, very good. And we have to keep our success and not to lose it. And the system should be more careful. We have to be careful. I want to tell you, when I'm coming to a crowded place, I'm putting a mask on my face because I'm very careful. But it's not over, because we are not an autocratic economic situation. We have, flights from everybody, from everywhere to Israel and vice versa. So we have to be careful. But the situation is very good.
All right. So again, it really just sounds like we need to stay vigilant if we want to prevent the spread of the virus. And we need to wear our masks where there are crowds, be on the safe side, and we really just need to be smart about what it is that we're doing.
And we have to be careful with our flights abroad. If it's necessary, it's necessary, but if not, don't do it. And if you are doing it, go with a mask.
All right, Professor Yehuda Adler, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
A mixture of clouds and sun is what we're looking at over here in Israel for tonight and tomorrow. This evening, lows are set to remain between 17 to 22 degrees Celsius, just like yesterday, and then tomorrow, highs are meant to be in the upper 20s in Celsius. Back to Aaron in the studio.
And now before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. This is the smartest dog I think I've ever seen. It's surprising. I feel like my dog would love this as well, but he would likely just be scared. I'd be scared. Brave too. Amazing. That is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.24 shekels to the American dollar and 2.66 shekels to the Canadian dollar. Finally, for the latest updates in the news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.